Make sure that's working correctly. Make sure my mic is on, unlike last time. Okay, that's working. So make sure this is working as well, just in case. Properties. Yes. Okay. Cool. All right. And then just pop over here real quick to that. And is it running? It is. Okay. Making sure me doing it from home didn't mess anything up. Okay. So, based on the amount that I got done with my class on Thursday, we're going to be able to get through most of the chapter today, and so that we'll actually have anything to do on Wednesday, we're probably going to get done early today. So we're going to get through basically everything but the final section, which is like political changes in America, which is also the Andrew Jackson stuff. And we'll just leave it at that. Now, that said, there is a... Where are we at? There is a video I want to show you guys. It's about 6 minutes long. That normally I would show after this first slide, but since we're online and YouTube is weird, I'm going to show it at the very end of class in case it like cuts my video, so that if it does, it won't affect the online folks too badly. It's about the Erie Canal. I like it. It gives a pretty good overview of the construction of the Erie Canal and how important it was. It also shows its age, not only in the quality of the video, but in who they decide to interview for the importance of the Erie Canal in New York. You're going to see some old faces and some that are current, but not in any way important to New York anymore. We'll get to that a little bit later. So, yeah, if it cuts real bad for the online folks, I'll just post a link. Anyway, also, just a reminder, a week from today, second paper's due. So we're going to be here next Monday. That's our last day of class for Monday, Wednesday classes. That's going to be our review day. So show up for class next Monday. If you can, for those of you in person, those of you here looking at me, if you can physically bring in your paper, that'd be great, because I do have to grade a lot of papers before the exams. And it's a lot easier for me to grade them when they're physically in my hand. But if not, it's fine. You can email them to me. But try to do that like on that Monday. Because if I'm getting them in dribs and drabs over the course of the week while I'm trying to grade exams, it's going to be a pain in the ass. So please get them to me that Monday. For you online folks, obviously email them to me. But again, that Monday, because I have to get it done by like that next Monday for all the grades. So if they're not in by then, that's it. I can't accept any other ones. I turn in the grades and it's out of my hands. Okay, any questions before we start from any of you guys? Cool, welcome back from the break. We have literally this week and then next Monday and it's exam, so we're almost done. And then if you guys come back to deal with me, I mean, if you guys are completing your history credit with your high school, you're going to have to deal with me because I'm the only history professor here. So you'll see me again for 102. But you want to deal with me for like a month college is weird. We basically have all of December off and the first week of January, I think. So yeah, we're not starting back until like the second week of January. Anyway, let's finish this. So we talked about the War of 1812 in like a single slide, from 1812 to about 1814. The final battle was technically in 1815 because, Andrew Jackson. But again, due to the distance and lines of communication, technically the treaty was signed in around Christmas Eve 1814, and the battle in New Orleans was in January of 1815, so there was no real way for Andrew Jackson to know that the war was technically over. So I will give him that. We'll talk more about how Andrew Jackson was a garbage human being a little bit later. So, I've got images here. Right, Washington City was burned down during the war, just as a reminder. There's more Andrew Jackson. There was the whole, there was a lot going on in this war. Tecumseh, the native that, from the previous slide, that the Americans had chased out of the United States, ended up being a brigadier general, helped capture Detroit. He was killed at the Battle of the Thames. There was also this Federalist meeting in New England where they were considering seceding from the Union, and in the smallest sense were very pro-British. And while they were having this meeting, the British landed in the U.S. and burned down Washington City, so it looked very bad for the Federalists, is the short version of that. What you need to know about that is the Federalists looked very bad at this time, because they're like, maybe we shouldn't be having this war. And then literally the Capitol got burned down. It's like, oh, we maybe shouldn't have said anything. So, once again, taking a step back, because, technically Madison was in charge during the war. So we're taking a step back to Jefferson, the expansion of the federal government, which technically was what the Democratic Republicans were not supposed to be doing, but, it's weird how you have a party that claims they want small government, but then when they get into power, they're like, we should add a whole lot more laws that expands the power of the government. We had the American system. This was Henry Clay, farmer aid, federal tariffs. Basically, this used the tariffs that make it so that stuff coming in from overseas would be taxed and prevent, a tariff, again, makes it so that stuff coming from overseas would be more costly to protect American goods, which is to say make them cheaper to the American consumer. And then also use those tariffs to aid farmers, usually with certain tax write-offs and stuff. I mean, still today, especially the big farmers, there's all sorts of federal aid things that if they didn't have, they probably wouldn't be able to turn a profit. Farming is a very difficult job when it comes to being able to even survive. A lot of those federal aid programs actually came about during World War II, which we'll get to at the end of next semester. So that's for later. It was also these federally funded internal improvements that pushed for moving west. When it came to expanding westward, Most of these folks were veterans of the War of 1812, and the way that the federal government pushed west, it wasn't like in Europe where they would set up like the European powers had been doing, where they would set up outposts and have like army bases, and gradually civilians would move in. They would just like give land to veterans of the war as like their payment. So A, they wouldn't have to pay them money, but B, they would start settling west, and then as towns would basically naturally grow up around these areas, more people would head west, which would just further increase the process. So 1811, we had the first steamboat, which expanded steamboat traffic, and it tanked freight prices, which obviously meant overland freight was diminished substantially. If you're going to move freight by wagon, you're not going to get a lot of business because it's so much more expensive and so much slower than people who are running steamboats. That said, the Cumberland Road, which we mentioned before, did help this a little bit. And as we mentioned, this Cumberland Road was federally funded. There's also the Santa Fe Trail, which was from Missouri down to Mexico. This one was older than, European settlement in North America. Congress negotiated with the Osage natives to use for commercial travel. Now, again, this wasn't, created by federal funds, but it was federally negotiated. So there's a lot of like federal involvement. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of federal involvement in all of this. And the big one, this is the one that I would show you the video on at the end of this slide, but we're going to wait to the end of the class. I can't words. The Erie Canal. This was a huge deal. 363-mile waterway from the Mohawk River to Buffalo, New York. It wasn't completed until 1825. It cost a lot of money. Also, as the video is going to mention, the United States didn't have any qualified engineers. We didn't know how to make a canal. And a canal is more than just like digging a ditch, from one place to another. It's going through different strata, for one thing, different types of dirt. Again, as we're going to see in the video, there's at one section a solid wall of limestone they have to blast through with dynamite. You have to keep all that from caving in. And then also, one of the major things about a canal is it usually goes through areas that are multiple elevations, so you have to use locks where the ship goes in and you close it off, and you either pump water in to raise the level up or pump the water out to raise the level, to move the level down, and then you open the lock on the other side so it can move through without causing some horrible pressure differential that'll break things. And this is in the early 1800s. Canals were very, very technologically advanced. By the time this thing was finished, before we had the Erie Canal, shipping a ton of grain from Buffalo to New York City by land cost $100 and took 20 days. After the canal was finished, it cost $9 and took 6 days. That's a pretty substantial difference in shipping cost and time, needless to say. And due to the the fact that the Erie Canal connected to the Great Lakes, it wasn't just from, Buffalo, because Buffalo isn't just like some grand hub on its own, but it's on the Great Lakes. So the Great Lakes themselves being interconnected, it's basically connecting all the way over to, well, Wisconsin again, the furthest west, Wisconsin and Minnesota. So all the farmers that could basically access the Great Lakes could ship all the way to the Hudson River now, and therefore to the Atlantic Ocean. But all of that freight is moving through New York City, therefore turning New York City into what it is today. The Erie Canal is why New York City is what it is. And the Erie Canal becoming what it was, and creating not only New York City, but a bunch of cities along the canal. There's a lot of cities in New York State, that only exist today because of the canal. A lot of other canal projects came about, created Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Toledo, as well as other manufacturing centers. That said, there were a lot more, canal attempts that ended in failure, and in fact bankrupted entire states because of how expensive the process was, and if it didn't pay back in dividends, it was real bad. There was an attempt to build a canal through a swamp in North Carolina, I think. It didn't work very well, as you can imagine. I mean, the swamps here in the Carolinas at all are just don't bother. So we have two views on the American system here. Tariffs and the bank and the infrastructure. The southern view, the tariffs and the bank, is going to profit off the South's poverty. The South, in large part, was impoverished in terms of the amount of people. However, none of the impoverished were in Congress. The only people who were in Congress were the rich planters who, were running the economy. So I don't know what that's about. So we got the steamboat. This is a bit further west. Well, I guess this is, New Orleans. And there again is the Cumberland Road. We've already kind of gone over this. So this is the Erie Canal. Not a very big canal in today's standards, especially when we talk about, the Panama or the Suez, where we've had recent issues. Because, they were built, most of these canals were built in the 1800s. And they certainly were not created for the super tankers of today. In fact, the super tankers of today are limited in size by the canals we have. The Erie, I don't think, is really in use beyond. I don't know if it's in use at all anymore. I think they might have. I know they still do shipping on the Great Lakes, because there's still ships being lost on the Great Lakes. But I don't think they use the Erie for moving stuff. But I do want to point something out on this image. if you ever see these old types of canals, and I remember we would ride over one when I took the train in Dublin, they have these flat paths on both sides. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what these were for? Well, this was 1800s, so there wasn't any motor vehicles yet. Okay, why would they need horses? It's close. To pull the barges. Because they didn't have motors, so they didn't have any way to really power the stuff going through the canals. They couldn't use a sailboat because, the wind's not going to really cooperate. So it's a barge. A barge isn't usually powered. It's not really going to be powered. So they would either have an ox or a horse or a donkey on either side, and they just tie them up to the barge and walk them along, and that's how they'd pull them through. Because this isn't a river. This isn't flowing. Typically, a barge just flows down a river. But since this is a canal, it's typically stagnant. So you're just being pulled along by, the animal in question. So that's what that's about. You'd see that a lot. Again, on very, very old pictures. And again, the barges were usually much smaller than the things we have today. All right. All right. Let me grab this again real quick. So after the War of 1812, James Monroe was trying to improve relations with Great Britain because, again, Britain being up in Canada was still stirring up the natives, more so than the Americans were, because the Americans were always causing issues in the West. So he sent John Quincy Adams to London to try to limit naval presence on the Great Lakes, which again is just a weird thought to me. I guess because right now, we have Canada to the north, and they're certainly not putting naval vessels on the Great Lakes. We solidified where the U.S.-Canadian border was, the 49th parallel, which that was a whole thing. I forget exactly where that was. There's a place in somewhere along the Canadian-American border where there's some weirdo backwoods guys that are like, oh, we should have more land, but the American government backed off and wouldn't take it. It's like, guys, chill out. It's Canadian land. We don't want that. We don't really want where you guys are. It's cold and you can't grow anything there. And then also the joint British-U.S. occupation of the Oregon Territory, which, if you notice, doesn't include Spain. I showed you guys that map last time of where the Oregon Territory was claimed by the U.S., Spain, and Britain, which was just a problem waiting to happen. This was officially having Britain and the U.S. occupying it together while not including Spain, which Spain was dealing with its own stuff. So, well, no, actually, hold on a second. Was this? Yeah, no, this was post Oh, never mind. I'm about to get to it. Right. There was always also the southern border. Um, there's the concern about Spain, the Seminole natives, which were also pushing into Creek land, because as we saw in the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson and the Cherokee had done a lot of damage to the Creek natives, and with them being in a weakened state, the Seminole were taking advantage of that and taking a lot of former Creek land. So they sent Andrew Jackson down to do diplomacy, and Andrew Jackson, in his own way, decided to do diplomacy by almost causing a three-way war. He attacked 2 Spanish forts, hanged 2 Seminole chiefs, and killed 2 British citizens. So, like, there was no one of anything down there. So rather than clearing things up, he just pissed off everybody. Somehow, everyone was tired of dealing with Florida. The British overlooked it. The Spanish decided to sell Florida rather than fight over it in the Adams and Nice Treaty. And, well, we fought the Seminole, as we're going to see when we get to Jackson, for a long time. So he didn't fix that. We'll get to the Seminole in a little bit. What I was going to say when it came to the joint occupation of Oregon was that Spain was not long to be in control of Mexico, because there was a lot going on south of us. Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Mexico all had a bunch of revolutions around the same time and threw off Spanish control. And when this happened, Monroe, I can't say enacted because this isn't a law, this isn't any kind of rule. This is more of this is how we're going to do things, and if you respect it, we'll respect our end of the deal. So, the Monroe Doctrine said that the Western Hemisphere was under the U.S. sphere of influence, and therefore Europe should leave it alone. Now, the other side of that was that all the other stuff that Europe was doing in, say, Africa, because this was getting near the scramble for Africa, their interference in Asia, in the Pacific Islands, we'll leave that alone. But all this other stuff going on in the Americas, that's for us to be involved in. And boy, did we. And we continue to be involved in it, and overthrowing people that we don't like, and putting in people in power that we do like, and then deciding we're going to overthrow them because we don't like them anymore. See Cuba, and all of Central America, and a lot of South America too. But at this point, we extended diplomatic relations to the countries that overthrew Spain, which legitimized their claims of independence, which is a major diplomatic requirement for an independence movement. Remember, that was something that we needed from France when we had our independence movement. Because if you don't have diplomatic recognition from another country, it's just a civil war. That's why during our Civil War, the South tried to get England or France or somebody to recognize them as a separate nation so that it wouldn't be just a civil war, it would be an independence movement. But that never happened. So by the end of the 1820s, we had merchants trading in Mexico, China, Britain, and even into the Pacific Ocean, which again we'll get to next semester, because we were not quite to our word when it came to not interfering in certain areas. We like to get our hands in stuff. And while this was going on and we were further expanding industrially, Providence, Rhode Island, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania became these major industrial production centers. I mean, I guess they still are. I don't know what they do in Providence, Rhode Island, despite having lived there for 2 years. It's just a lot of traffic. That was loud. Turn this down. It was an email. Let's see. Was it anything or was it... exam. Yes. Okay, so technically we have made the country bigger. We've got Florida now. So now the southern border extends to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, granted, Mexican territory is still like the Southwest. We don't have, Texas or anything in that area yet. But that comes later. So here's Andrew Jackson about to do some war crimes. There's the Monroe Doctrine, saying that we're gonna take advantage of these people. You guys aren't allowed to. This is a much later event because you've got this is Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck of Prussia. You can tell by the helmet. I don't actually know what flag this is, though. This is somewhere in South America. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Monroe Doctrine. Theodore Roosevelt actually calls back to the Monroe Doctrine, so we'll get into that again next semester. So all of this does come up again. All right. Let's get a little further along. So the American system, the roads, canals, rivers, etc. I should mention, because I made sure I mentioned in my Tuesday, Thursday class, when it's talking about rivers, that was an internal development thing. A lot of rivers in the east were navigable. You could run a ship up or down a river. However, there were spots in the rivers where there may be fallen trees or rocks or parts where it's too shallow or otherwise hazardous. But you can go in and either dredge it or, hell, use dynamite and make it so that you can more easily run ships through that part of the river. It's a lot easier, a lot cheaper than digging a canal. But it still is, a federal works project. And it's a lot easier than once we get further west and you start running into the rivers there, where it's just like fast-flowing rivers and big-ass boulders and shallow rivers especially, where they basically have to create a new type of boat to be able to run those rivers. So that's what that's about. And the point of that is that it was meant to bind America closer together, because now you can get from place to place much quicker. You can move goods from place to place much easier. But also, it made it so that each region could further specialize in what they did. So it became a larger version of what you saw with like neighbors working together, where one farm would specialize with like wheat because they had certain tools, and the other farm would specialize with, say, eggs because they had a bunch of chickens, and they didn't have to worry about having to do a little bit of everything because their neighbors could help them out. And in this case, we had, excuse me, whole regions that could specialize, because you had train lines, well, not train lines yet, I'm getting ahead of myself. You had canals and steamboats and all of that could move goods quickly enough that regions wouldn't even have to grow food, because they could trade their goods for food and ship it back to where they were. So, for example, in the South, we had the Creek natives being forced out of their land, and then, of course, Florida territory for more cotton, which led to, again, the spread of more slavery to produce the cash crops. And rather than doing the age-old system of either crop rotation or even just leaving a field fallow for a year, where you just don't use a field and let it just like lay there and get some nutrients back, they just used all the fields until the fields couldn't support anything anymore. And then they just like pack up and move further west. And they used cotton so heavily that they had to trade with the North for shoes and cloth and the West for food. They didn't grow their own food. They didn't like grow anything. Cotton is for cloth, but they didn't have their own textile industry. They didn't have any there was no industrial base in the South, which is why when the Civil War hit, the South was not in good shape. James and Dolly Madison, for example, after James Madison's presidency was over, then moved back to Montpelier. They weren't able to sustain a cotton plantation because the soil there was poor. Cincinnati, on the Ohio River, quickly grew due to the cotton trade. 1811, it was a little frontier town, and by 1819, it was a booming city. And not a boom town like we'll see further west, but it maintained itself as a city. And even in the Northeast, people were making fortunes off of the cotton trade. Northern merchants would open warehouses in port cities like Charleston and Savannah. So even places where they weren't growing cotton, they were still in the cotton industry. They were still part of the cotton economy, as it were. So in New England and New York, they focused on the trade. In Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, they built manufactured goods, which is to say tools, for the farmers out west. So when I said that like 2/3 of farmers, or not 2/3 of farmers, I again was looking at the thing. 2/3 of the American economy was wrapped up in cotton. This is why. Because everybody, even the people who weren't farmers at all, were involved to some degree in the trade. I mean, obviously, to have a cotton trade, you need someone to haul it off and sell it, and to grow it and harvest it and all of that, you need someone to make the tools. So you've got to have plenty of middlemen, and there's plenty of money to be made there. And these are the various lines of connection. Obviously, again, the railroads here, not quite yet. These are a little bit later, but you do have these roads which were still not that great, but we did have canals and rivers we could use. Especially here in South Carolina, we used rivers. We didn't really have canals. There were a lot of canals in the Northeast, though. Like down here, the Savannah River was another real good shipping river. And there's Cincinnati. I like the combination of like the horse-drawn carriages and the steamboats right here. Just this combination of the growth of industry with what you would imagine like old frontier settlements, because that's all they had. All right, we are almost done. One more section. I mean, 2 more slides, but 1 more section. So, speaking of the economy, and this is something we'll see more next semester, but there was a lot of this. There was a lot of, like, every couple of decades, there was an economic panic. Irresponsible banking practices, declining overseas demand. We'll get into each of those in a second. So in 1816, American banks started loaning out a lot of money to settlers. You know, a lot of folks heading west, and they need money to set up their little frontier home. So banks are loaning out money. Now, a lot of this was not banked up by sufficient collateral, which is to say, you know, they're not really able to. They can't say, oh well, if you know, I'll put my house on it, because they don't have a house. They're using the loan to build a house. And not backed up by hard currency either, because the European nations are currently hoarding gold and silver in response to stuff happening in South America. So due to events in South America, which I've not ever even looked into, so, well, actually, these are probably the revolutions in South America that are throwing off Spanish rule. So Spain's going broke. So Europe's holding on to their gold and silver, which is making it so America can't get a hold of gold and silver. So this is like international economic stuff happening. While that's going on, Napoleonic Wars are ending. So Europe's able to grow its own food now, because they don't have soldiers stomping through the fields. So there's a less. There's a reduced need for American food, and therefore farmer income is reduced substantially because now Europeans can grow a lot of their own food again. So directors of the Second Bank of America realized they're just basically printing money without having any backing to it. So they start tightening the credit to stop this expansion of the money supply. In other words, the way I put it, and again, I'm not an economy expert or anything, but it's like if you had a bar of gold in the bank, in the vault, and you print out, I don't know, $100 bill, and that's what the gold is worth. But then you print out another 100, so you've got $200, but you've only got one bar of gold in the vault. So both of those $100 bills are what that bar of gold's worth. That bar of gold is now worth half of what it was before, and you're just printing money, and all of that money has to be worth what is in that vault. So each of those is worth half of what it was to begin with. It's going to cause a problem very quickly. Well, to alleviate that, the bank stopped printing money, which immediately caused a problem because people freaked out. Banks started failing. Others called in loans to try to get some of that money back. The people that had loans called in on them that didn't have the money were immediately dropped into economic ruin. Money. Cotton farmers that went into debt to purchase their land obviously didn't have money to pay back because they went into debt to buy land with the hopes that they could grow a lot of cotton and sell cotton and pay back their loan. But now the bank wants their loan money back before the cotton's even grown. So they're out of luck. Some states try to tax branch banks, wow, which, as we've already seen, can't be done, or print money without specie, which is to say gold or silver to back it up, which again is like printing monopoly money. It's not worth anything. If you print money without hard currency to back it up, it's not worth anything. Congress debated for a very long time on how to fix this. Northern merchants wanted higher tariffs. However, southern planters would be hurt by this because it would make it harder for them to sell their goods overseas, because if you raise tariffs, it would make it harder for overseas goods to come in, but it would also mean that other countries would raise their tariffs in response, and then you wouldn't be able to sell your goods overseas. You can't just sell within your own country. The example I gave was if the United States put a tariff on, say, French steel, France would, or vice versa, France put a tariff on American steel, we wouldn't even need to, pass a vote to put a response tariff on French steel. It would just be automatic. It would be, oh, well, they're putting a tariff on us, well, then we'll put a tariff on them. That's just how it's done. You don't really even need to debate about it. That's just it's just an automatic response. And it ended with nothing. It just eventually dissipated. The economy stabilized, but it caused Americans to remain skeptical of federal banks, which is going to cause issues in the future, which is to say, when we come back on Wednesday, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson fighting the bank. So that's going to be important for next time. So this was a whole thing. And for those of you that that are familiar with the Fallout universe, this is why bottle caps are a solid form of currency in the Fallout universe, is that each bottle cap represents a bottle of clean water, which in a world that has been wrecked by radiation is far more valuable than a bar of metal that you cannot eat. That's what that's about. Okay. I've got this. New edition of Macbeth, the bank's ghost. I am the ghost of commerce. There's a lot going on here. No credit, down with the bank. Yeah, we'll kind of get into that next time. There's a bunch of weird. These things, it's a lot. Okay, one more slide, and then I'm gonna pull up that video that hopefully won't destroy my my stream. I'll see if I can do like YouTube commenters do and just like comment about it. All right, so the last big thing is Missouri. So 1819, Missouri applied for territory, applied for statehood. Missouri Territory applied for statehood, and of course the debate for slavery intensified greatly. So the congressman from New York, James Talmadge Jr., proposed that they should ban the importation of slaves and a gradual emancipation law be passed before they would admit it as a state, because they already had slaves in Missouri as a territory. But for state constitution, they should no longer import more slaves into the territory and gradually emancipate those that were the territory. Obviously, Southern congressmen rejected this because, obviously. So Missouri bordered the Northwest Territory, which had outlawed slavery. It also bordered Kentucky and Tennessee, which were slave states. Because, again, obviously. So the congressman wanted a new slave state to get more power in the Senate, because northern states had more power in the House, because northern states were more populous. Even with the 3/5 compromise that gave southern states more power for the more slaves they had, they still had less people overall. Also, Missouri had a lot of fertile land, so they could have more plantations. Also, if they outlawed slavery in a place where slavery already sort of was, planters felt that it would encourage slaves to revolt, which had been happening more in the previous decade. You know, we can't have that. And also, when Maine tried to declare statehood, Southern congressmen blocked it because obviously Maine's not going to be a slave state. It's Maine, guys. So the next year, we had Henry Clay stepping in to work on a compromise. Again, Henry Clay was known as the Great Compromiser. He was the politician who tried to get things done by getting people to work together. And hopefully, he felt that this would maybe set up a solution for the future to try and keep this from happening again. Maine will be admitted as a free state, obviously. And Missouri will be a slave state because, I mean, it's in a position for that. Now, for future stuff, the southern border of Missouri will be a boundary between free and slave states and the Louisiana Territory. So going forward, anything Louisiana Territory south of the Missouri border would be, slave states, and north would be free states. And why didn't this? There we go. So this was the Missouri Compromise. This was a major step in the slavery debate in America, in antebellum America, but also showed how quickly the slavery debate would have the American politicians very nearly come to blows. And this is before Bloody Kansas. So here we have the Missouri Compromise line. See here, so the line of Missouri. So they got the Arkansas Territory to work with. Then all this up here will be considered free territory. Which, I mean, all this up here is basically like corn land, and then further up is just, it's cold and gross. So, yeah. I'll talk to my friend about that later. Michigan Territory. Oh, Youper. Okay. Yeah, let me see if I can get that video to run without causing too many issues. Alright. No. Another boxes? No. Alright. Do. Where is that what it is? Yeah. Alright. Display. Duplicate. And then move to this because it's weird. Are you weird? How you like this? I'll just give them the link. It doesn't matter. Okay. Don't have time.
All over the world, the modern era is being born. It's the Industrial Revolution. America is racing to catch up.
You guys, I'm stopping the stream. I will give you the link later.